haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now. We have new stories every day. Now, let's go. My ex-wife cheated, contracted an STD, and now, after all these years, she's desperate for my help. Meanwhile, I become successful, wealthy even. Yet here she is, knocking on my door as though nothing has happened. 10 years ago, she walked away, taking the house, a substantial settlement, and her new, uprated partner. Now, after I fought my way to the top, she's returned, broken and pleading. That evening, as I looked around my empty house, I reflected on what we had once shared and how everything fell apart. The hotel room was hers for the night, a final act of courtesy I had arranged for her, though every inch of me despised the idea. The hotel, the gifts, the space, it was all a reminder of her betrayal. I didn't want to see her or her new friends again. The arrangements were done, and I made it clear in my message that I didn't need her thanks nor any apologies. Let me know when her team would come by to pick up her things I had said, and everything unnecessary would be boxed and packed, just like the remnants of our failed marriage. 10 years later, at exactly 8:15 a.m. on a Wednesday, there was a loud knock at my door. It wasn't just knocking, it was desperate, almost frantic pounding. Annoyed, I rubbed the sleep from my eyes, slid on my robe and slippers, and headed downstairs. I hadn't been expecting anyone, especially not at this hour. Through the peephole, I saw her, older, thinner, a shadow of the vibrant woman she used to be. Her hair, once glowing with life, was now streaked with gray, and her clothes, worn and tattered, resembled those of the homeless. She looked more like a stranger than the woman I had once loved. "Mike, it's me. Please let me in," she pleaded as soon as I opened the door. The voice, though weakened and cracked, was unmistakable, but I slammed the door in her face without a second thought. She knocked again, softer this time, her sobs now audible through the door. "Please, Mike, I'm begging you. Just let me in. I'll explain everything." Against my better judgment, I opened the door again, but only enough to block her entry with my foot. I didn't want to make a scene on my front doorstep for the whole neighborhood to witness. "What do you want?" I growled. "I told you 10 years ago I never wanted to see you again. What part of that didn't you understand?" Tears streamed down her face as she wiped them away with trembling hands. "I'm hungry. I'm tired. Please, I just need to use the bathroom. I'll explain everything later, I promise." She looked like she was on the verge of collapsing right there. I wasn't heartless, but after what she did to me, I wasn't eager to offer any kindness. Still, I wasn't cruel enough to let her stand there in her condition, especially when she was clearly desperate. I relented, opening the door wider and motioning her inside. "You know where the bathroom is," I muttered, reminding her that this was once her home too. She dropped her worn suitcase by the door and hurried inside. I watched as she disappeared down the hall, her footsteps barely audible on the hardwood floors. While she was in the bathroom, I made my way to the kitchen and started brewing coffee. I leaned against the counter, the memories flooding back, memories I had spent years burying, trying to forget. When she returned, I handed her a cup of coffee without a word. She accepted it with shaky hands, her eyes downcast. "What happened to Dr. Wonderful?" I asked, unable to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. Her eyes welled up again. "It fell apart," she whispered, avoiding my gaze. "After we got married, Bruce faced a huge malpractice lawsuit. We both lost our jobs, our licenses. Then things got bad. He became abusive. One day, I caught him cheating. I couldn't take it anymore. I left. And now you're here," I said, my voice cold. "Now that everything has crumbled, you come crawling back to me. Do you realize it's the anniversary of the night you tore my heart apart? 10 years, almost to the day." She said nothing, just sipped her coffee, trembling as she held the cup. "Did you call the police on him?" I asked. "No, I was too scared," she admitted, "but I did divorce him. Left with almost nothing. I've been living out of shelters ever since." I felt a mix of bitterness and pity as she continued to talk about how she had nowhere else to go, how even her parents had abandoned her. "Please, Mike," she said again, desperation creeping back into her voice. "I just need a place to stay, just for a little while. I'll find work, I promise. I'll cook, clean, anything. I shook my head. Why on earth would I want you near me again? After everything you did. I have nowhere else to go, she whispered. There's a shelter downtown, I pointed out. They're all full, she said, her voice breaking. I wanted to lash out, to scream at her for the pain she had caused me, but I held back. Instead, I stared at her for a long moment, watching as the once proud woman crumbled before me. She looked so small, so fragile now. And despite my hatred, a part of me still couldn't help but feel some sympathy. Against my better judgment, I suggested we eat. I made scrambled eggs and bacon, the same way she used to make them for me. Her eyes lit up when I placed the plate in front of her, and she devoured the meal as though she hadn't eaten in days. I sat across from her, sipping my coffee and watching her eat. "Thank you," she said softly when she finished. "I don't deserve this, but thank you." "Don't thank me yet," I replied. "I'm not sure what I'm doing here. Part of me still despises you." She nodded, lowering her head. "I understand." "Go take a shower," I said bluntly. "You smell like the street." She winced but nodded. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, before disappearing into the bathroom. As she showered, I washed the dishes and thought about what to do next. I couldn't just throw her back out onto the streets, but I also couldn't let her stay. She had destroyed me once before, and I wasn't about to let her do it again. I was no longer the man I had been 10 years ago, no longer the kind, trusting soul who believed in happy endings. When she emerged from the bathroom, her hair wet and her face scrubbed clean, I saw the toll the years had taken on her. She looked fragile, a shell of the woman I had once loved. We sat in awkward silence for a few moments before I finally spoke again. "My mom's coming over later," I said. "She's always been good at figuring things out. Maybe she'll have some advice." She nodded again, looking relieved. "Your mom was always so kind to me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. When my mother arrived, she embraced me before turning her attention to Leslie. "My God," she said softly, taking in her appearance. "It's been 10 years, hasn't it?" Leslie nodded, her eyes welling up once more. They exchanged a few quiet words before my mom turned to me and said, "Why don't you give us some time alone?" I retreated to my office, giving them space to talk. While they were in the living room, I searched online for any updates on the malpractice lawsuit Leslie had mentioned. It didn't take long to find out that Bruce had been accused of misdiagnosing hundreds of patients, over-medicating children, and racking up fraudulent medical bills. Leslie's name was mentioned a few times in the reports, though it seemed Bruce had been the mastermind behind the scheme. When I returned to the living room, my mother looked up at me with concern in her eyes. "Mike," she said softly, "she's not well." "I know," I replied. "She needs help, medical attention at the very least." I sighed, rubbing my forehead. "And what am I supposed to do? She's not my responsibility anymore." "No," my mother agreed, "but maybe it's not about responsibility. Maybe it's about doing the right thing."